All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to our workshop on grad school applications hosted by the Engineering Biology Research Consortium Student and Postdoc Association. So my name is Ross, and I'm a postdoc in Peter Zancher's group at the University of British Columbia, and I'll be the host for today. So before we get into the workshop, I'm going to let each of our sort of workshop leaders and panelists at the end of the session introduce themselves, starting with Jan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yan. I am currently also a postdoctoral fellow at Caltech. I did my PhD in chemical and biological engineering in the Szynski lab at Georgia Tech. And I just realized today it's been 7 years since I wrote my last statement of purpose. But I think over the years, I've trained enough undergrads and sent them to successful grad school journeys. So hopefully my advice will be helpful.
Hi everyone, my name is Yue. I actually come from Yan's PhD lab, so I'm a PhD candidate. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at Georgia Tech in Dr. Mark Szynski's group, also in chemical and molecular engineering. And I hope I can help with your statement purposes today.
Hi everyone, my name is Ice. The last name is Ketisebi. It's kind of hard to pronounce because I'm from Thailand, and most Thai names are relatively difficult to pronounce. Right now, I just graduated from University of Washington in the program called Molecular Engineering and Science, kind of like a multidisciplinary program. So the focus will be a little bit different from the classical program. I work with two advisors, Jesse Sarachan in Department of Chemistry and James Curtis in Department of Chemical Engineering. So I come by applying to different kind of programs, and it depends on like the nature of the program you're applying to. You may have to narrate your story for the SOP and letter a little bit differently, and I'm happy to help giving some advice on that.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks everyone. So yeah, let's get into it. Today in this workshop, we're going to talk about the typical components of an application to a PhD program, and we're mostly going to deep dive into the statement of purpose, which is the sort of main key document that you'll discuss your research interests and past experience. And we're going to do a workshop that sort of takes the key messages for your statement of purposes and tries to build them out so that you have a good structure for how to get those messages across. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about how to convince programs that you're going to be a good fit for them and the research that's going on there. Finally, we'll do a little bit of a wrap up on considerations for where you should be targeting to apply, and give you a bunch of resources that we have on writing applications. And then we'll finish up with whatever time we have left with a Q&A with our panelists here / workshop leaders. There will be time as well during the workshop breakout to ask some questions as you're doing the workshop activities. So, grad applications. Hopefully, those of you that are applying this year have already started to look at this. But for those of you that are applying more in the future, this is sort of what the typical components of an application look like. I have sort of separated this a bit. In the US, it's really common to apply to departments and then later choose a lab. In other countries, it's more common to apply directly to a lab. And so there are some shared pieces of an application, including your CV or resume, letters of recommendation from former advisors, usually, or people that you've worked with, and your transcript. But depending on if you're applying to a department or directly to a lab, you might have, say, a cover letter or a statement of purpose. There may also be supplementary documents such as personal statements / diversity statements, or application form materials that you need to fill out. So we're just putting this here so that you're aware of what to expect in an application and what to start preparing. If you're applying this year and you haven't asked for letters of recommendation yet, I would immediately do that once you're done with this workshop. So when we talk about the statement of purpose, for those of you that are going to be directly applying to labs, I want you to take what we're talking about and think about condensing it down even more than it is for a typical 2-page statement of purpose to something that is more like a 1-page cover letter. It will also be much more directly targeted to a specific lab. So there, a lot of the same messages and so on will be conserved, but the format is different. in the sort of Q&A part at the end, we're happy to talk more in detail about that. Okay, so let's talk about the statement of purpose. So these are typically 2-page documents with standard fonts, and they can be broken down into a few different sections: an introduction, some of your relevant work experiences, your fit for the program of interest, and your sort of future plans. So in the introduction, what they're looking for is some motivation for why you want to go to graduate school. Where are you coming from? And it should also sort of summarize your overall statement, you know, taking that motivation and then bring you towards what you want to do in the future, but in a condensed way so that the details can be filled out through the rest of the application. In the relevant experiences part, this is mostly we're going to talk about research you've done as an undergraduate or a master's student or whatever you're currently coming from. But more specifically, sort of what research questions did you pursue and why did you sort of ask those questions and pursue them? What work did you do specifically? So it's, of course, like we often operate within teams, but you want to be clear about what you did, what sort of questions you pursued. You can talk about the skills that you developed along the way, which will help them to see your sort of capability as a future graduate student. And you can then talk about how your research and relevant experiences changed you as a researcher or scientist. So this is actually pretty important. It's part of the narrative of sort of taking you from a early undergrad or whatever student to now somebody that has developed an interest in science and research and engineering or whatever it is that you want to pursue into graduate school. And so if they don't see that evolution, then they're not necessarily going to understand you as a person. So this is where it can get a bit tricky with sort of connecting your technical background to your sort of more personal development. But the better you can weave those together, the stronger the statement will usually come off. So finally, this should sort of lead into why are you interested in a given program that you're applying to? You know, if you're talking about how your experiences changed your interests over time, and that led you to a place where you're interested in systems biology or synthetic biology or whatever it is, then it should sort of lead into the next part, which is the fit. You know, I'm applying to this program because it will extend these interests that I've developed over time. And those interests have led me to want to work with Professor X, Y, or Z at the school that I'm applying to. If you're doing a cover letter specifically to a lab, then this would just be for that lab. Finally, this should then transition into how the program that you're applying to will sort of support your future goals beyond just the research that you're interested in. How will this keep that progression of your career going to your future? And so the statement can then wrap up with sort of what you want to do in the future and why, and how being in these labs that you're interested in, being in the program will sort of get you there. So there's a lot of common mistakes to writing statement of purpose. For one, the introduction does not need to be overly detailed or lengthy. So this isn't like a personal statement for applying to college. There might be a personal statement part of the application, and in that you can expound. But this should be concise. You know, why do you want to go to grad school? Keep it to a few sentences. So another problem with the relevant experiences part is when people write this in sort of like their CV, just in paragraph form. Don't just list out the things that you're doing. They have your CV. So tell them why you did things. Tell them what you learned from them. Sometimes people get lost in writing the research details of the projects they worked on. They don't actually need that much detail. They need to know the problems that you worked on and why, and sort of what you learned along the way. So try to just take out the most important bits about what you are working on, and then use that to progress your story. Finally, you might not have, often it's left out how this sort of connects to the program that you're interested in. So you might have many experiences. Try to choose the ones that most will sort of progress you from the start of your undergrad to wanting to apply to a program of interest. Even if you weren't doing work that you want to do as a grad student, you know, that's totally fine. A lot of people change fields, but along the way, hopefully you can demonstrate where you learned about something. Maybe it was a class that got you excited about a new field. That's actually perfectly fine to talk about, especially if you weren't doing any related work before. So try to like give that little push into what you're doing in your grad school. For the fit part, often a problem is if you're missing some details, you don't want to just say, oh, I'm interested in this lab and that lab, and then leave it at that. Try to make a connection between what you've done in the past, what you're excited about, what you want to do, and what that lab is currently doing. So take a look at what their recent papers are, look at their website, see what kind of research they're interested in, and so you can sort of connect the dots there. And the more concretely that you can connect your interest to what they are publishing, then you can sort of make a better case that you'll be a good fit. And finally, for the future directions, try not to be too vague or generic about it. So doing a PhD is a sort of big commitment, and they need to see that you're thinking seriously about this and you're not just doing it because it's something to do. So why do you want to do a PhD? You know, what do you want to get out of it? What is your ultimate end goal? It's actually okay if you don't know if you want to be an academic, if you want to go into like industry research, or even do something else like work in government. You can explain that you're open to all these things, and you know, a PhD will help you sort of get to all of them. But make sure you have a rationale for doing a PhD. Okay, so throughout this statement, there should be a few messages that are popping out throughout. And this is going to lead us into our sort of breakout session workshop. Why do you want to go to graduate school? What do you want to research when you're a graduate student? And where do you want to do this research? So if you can really nail these throughout your statement, then the sort of reader will be able to sort of see you in their program more easily, basically. So in our breakout session, we're going to try to do this message building. We're going to take those messages and we're going to try to connect them to the statement. We're going to give you all time to sort of work on this and get some feedback from us while you're doing it. So the first part of our activity will be this sort of message building thing. Now, if you have a piece of paper or if you can pull up like a Word document or something, try to copy this sort of structure down where we have the main components of a statement of purpose that can be adapted into a cover letter or anything similar, and the key messages: why grad school, what research topics, and where. And ideally, you would try to have some of these messages sort of fit into each one of these categories. Now, some of them are going to be more or less, but that's okay. The key thing of this activity is to get you to think about getting these messages into your whole statement. And so you're not just talking about why you want to go to grad school in the intro and then sort of forgetting about it through the rest of the statement. Okay, so that's going to be the first part of our breakout session. And then in the second part, we're going to dive into these fit paragraphs and show you a couple of examples from yours truly that are better and worse. And I'll give you some opportunity to critique them and make fun of me. So let's get started with it. I think I'll have to set up the breakout rooms here. We'll pause the recording during the breakout and then go ahead into it. So just give me a second to get the breakout set up. In the meantime, if there's any brief questions, we can answer while I'm setting this up. Yeah, go ahead.
For writing the research section of the statement, I know you mentioned like not to go into excessive experimental detail, but how much like jargon are we allowed in terms of like discipline specific terms, or like can we expect the reviewer to be an expert in our field, in our subfield, in our sub-subfield, neither or none of the above?
Mm-hmm.
Good question. Let me like answer briefly into that question. So think about people who are reviewing your letters. There will be someone from the department you're applying to, honestly. So if you take a look at the department, there'll be people who are doing the research is similar to like what you want to do or what you have done. And there'll be some people who may not be too close to you know, the research you're doing as well. So I would say like you can use some jargon that might be in the bigger field but not too specific. Like if you work on something that is related to CRISPR, then maybe like you don't have to spell out what CRISPR is anymore. But if you're working on like, oh, I'm using CRISPR to do these specific things in these specific organisms, then you may want to, like spell it out just to make sure that it's like, it's something that the professor in that department can understand what you're trying to say.
Gotcha.
So yeah, you can get into details if it's something that, again, like, reiterating what Ross said, that like, if it's something that you figure it out and is interesting for the story, you can like go deeper. But if it's just something that you just like want to mention, then I would leave the space for something else that you've done during the journey as well. Does that help, Raina?
Gotcha. And then it does. Thank you. One other super quick question on a lot of the applications. There'll be like a drop-down menu of professors you want to work with. If you were indicating that elsewhere on the application, should you still mention specific people in the statement of purpose?
Yes, because it's not just
Great, thank you.
It's explaining why you're interested in.
Gotcha.
Yeah, no, good questions. Okay, so we're all set for the breakout rooms. Maybe we'll do 25 minutes total, guys. Try to come back at about 1:15. Okay, are we back? I think so.
So I think everyone should be forced to come back.
Okay.
At least I was.
Okay, sounds good. All right, welcome back, everyone. Hopefully that was an interesting activity at least. You get to make fun of my paragraphs from when I applied. If anybody didn't know whose that was. So just a couple considerations for applications, and we'll share some resources, and then we'll use the remainder of the time for some Q&A before we let you all go. So definitely, if you're applying, we would really recommend to make a spreadsheet to keep track of everything, especially for the different various labs and universities that you can apply to. In terms of where to apply, there's a lot of different schools, there's a lot of different potential labs you could work with. Definitely weigh the interest that you have in labs over just the straight up ranking of an institute. And definitely prioritize institutes where there's multiple labs you're interested in, especially if it's like you're applying to the program and then from there you might do rotations or something. You never know if that professor is gonna have openings, if a professor is going to be somebody that you have a good like rapport with, if the students are going to be happy in their lab or not. So you want to give yourself some options when you go to grad school. And you might be surprised when you get to a school about some new lab or something that is interesting that you had never heard of before. So try to keep an open mind and set yourself up well to succeed by having some options. Okay. So we also have a bunch of resources. They're here on this slide, but we will also include them in the chat. And you guys can then sort of click on them and go from there. We also have the Future SPA Slack that everyone's, of course, invited to. If you aren't on that and you want to get connected, just reply to my email that I sent out with a reminder about this whole thing, and we can get you set up. If you have any questions after the event, we're happy to answer them in there as well. So finally, let's get into our panel, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that are out there, especially for sort of non-standard applications that people are working on. So if you have a question, go ahead, either put it in the chat, open your mic, raise your hand, whatever.
Possibly silly question, but for things like what about our program? Do you like what do we do if it's generic? Because here's the thing, a lot of schools have very similar resources, and a lot of them are like, oh, we excel at XYZ type of research. So like, do we just pretend the others don't? Or
That's a good point. I would not trying to pretend that others didn't have whatever you're trying to, use in your PhD work. But I would say I will spend more time in the SOP to elaborate what the school is ready for you to join and like work on. because like, there are a lot of schools out there, and like trying to focus on what you know about that particular program is going to be more useful. So if there is something that's kind of generic, like you say that, like it seems like something that every school may probably have this, you can also like trying to mention that like you don't really know whether the other school has that or not, but this is something that you're really, interested in. For example, if you're working a lot with the tools called flow cytometry, and it's something for like, reading the cells in a single cell manner, something like that. And you can assume that like that's not something that every university in the world will have, right? And by having this kind of instrument or having this kind of core facility that has a lot of these machines to use, that could leverage your ability to work on a single cell research much better in that particular PhD program, something like that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would also want to add that if you're like particularly interested in one school, you can potentially reach out to some grad school in your lab that you're interested in, and ask them for more information about the lab, the school, and they may actually give you some insights that's really specific to that school that other schools do not have.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to like premier research programs, like once you're getting to like the top 5, like the resources available for those schools are going to be pretty similar. I wouldn't say like one school is better than the other. Like once you're a competitive applicant for those schools, then it's like these schools will be coming to you with during their grad school visitation weekends, like, hey, like this is the location that we have. Or the resources that we have. But I think in terms of like in your statement of purpose, it will be a little generic, right? Because they will have collaborations with this medical campus or like with resources in proximity to that area. So I think just like stick to what they have. There's no need to like compare schools between each other. That's like what the schools will do during the grad school visitation weekends after the acceptance.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I had a question. So when you're filling out the applications, generally some of the schools have a section in the application where they ask which other schools are you applying to. Do you have any idea how should we answer that question?
It's been a while for me. I think you can
Yeah, I feel
answer
like
it honestly, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
if I
so
were to take a guess, I would just say it's for the universities to take data on like who are their biggest competitors. Like for example, for Georgia Tech, I know like for us, UT Austin is our like biggest competitor, and we're always trying to like better them. I think these are mostly for these type of purposes. So you can be honest with your answers.
I think there is no harm in telling them that you're applying to other schools, because that's just appropriate to do so. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, this is a quick question, but if for an international student, is it necessary to say why the US, or can we just, because it's 2 pages is short, so.
So I guess I'm an international student as well, but I did study in the US as an undergrad. So I was like kind of applying within the US. I'd say you probably don't have to include like why US, just like the institution itself, I think should be enough, but it's like my personal opinion.
Yeah, I'm international myself, and I think like, it's not necessary to elaborate too much on, you are international for what reason, because you are. And it's like the statement of purpose is more about the research you are applying. And in other parts of the application, you probably say like, oh, this is the institution. I graduated from this university, and if it's not in the US, then it's already there. So like try to like spend more space and time on the research. That is, I believe, is the most important thing in the SOP setting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to justify like this work doesn't happen in my country, therefore I want to go there, because even people in the US are going to apply to a bunch of schools all over the place. I don't need to justify needing to go to Boston for something because whatever city I was from, didn't have that. It's fine. Okay, Cindy had a question in the chat. Hi, I'm wondering if and where it'd be appropriate to mention that I want to learn computational techniques, but that's not a main focus of what I want to study. Of course, I justify this interest with some experiences and relate it to the future goals part. I would say yes. And if you can also relate that to the sort of expertise that a lab has, then that'll be good too. So, if a research topic that you're interested in aligns with what a lab studies, and the skills that you can learn there align well with what they have to teach, then that's like a double way to sort of show a good fit of that being a good training environment for you.
Yeah, and also like how would you apply these computational techniques that you want to learn into your research? That could also be a plus.
Into your future as well. If it makes sense for your future goals. So this is how all these things connect together.
One thing I want to say is that, like, if the team that you're applying to have specific tools that they develop by themselves, like any computational tool that they develop by themselves, mention that could be, something that's kind of useful for the application, because they know that you spend time researching what the team is up to, right? For example, like here at UW, there's a group that do de novo protein design, and they use a tool called Rosetta. And Rosetta is a tool that was like used broadly, not just at UW, but at a different school in the US. So if you say that you want to learn how to use Rosetta, that's pretty, that make it sound stronger, in my opinion, because you know what it is and you know what you're expecting to learn on.
Yeah, and I think it's like a great sort of segue into talking about some kind of lab synergy or research synergy, right? If the research institute you're applying to has like a computational lab and then like an experimental lab, and you want to work at the intersection, right? I feel like that is fit for that program, in that like your institute have these two labs that can really synergize like my research focus. So I think it's actually quite nice to mention that.
Okay, two more questions from the chat and then we'll end it. But if people want to stick around, I'm happy to answer some more questions. So Moses says, hi, do I still need to include my research in my academic statement if a section is dedicated to research statement? There's a lot of very program specific things. So if anybody wants to comment on that real quick.
Yeah, I'm not familiar if there is like a specific academic statement in the US system, but there might be some in the program outside of the US. But I would say like the academic statement is mainly about your background, like what kind of class you're working on and something like that. So like mentioning like briefly in concise term about like what you're working on in the research in the academic statement would be okay. But if you have like another statement related to research, that's where you should spend more time to go into details of what you've done and what you want to do.
Great. And question from Arpan about if there are more examples of good fits for SOPs, or in general, some examples of a good SOP. We did share in the list of resources, there's a nice thing from Caltech, where they have different examples of how you can structure your introduction and different examples of how you can work on the different components of your application. So I would take a look at that. we could potentially also convince more people from the SPA to share. But do any of you know of like a list of SOPs anywhere? I'm not sure actually.
Yeah, I think like some
Yeah, I don't-
universities have, at least in their websites that they sort of like anonymize the applicant's name, something like that, and that could be a good place to look at.
Yeah, so I think in terms of like SOPs, I don't think there's a repository, but maybe the personal statement people have wrote for NSF GRFP can be recycled. There
Mhm.
is like a good repository for that.
Yeah, some universities like MIT have a communication lab, and we included a few links to the one from MIT specifically. And they often have examples or at least like a lot more detail on different application components for their specific programs, or maybe that are at least a bit more specific to the institute. And so I would take a look at those. Those might offer you some more examples, or at least pieces of examples, which can be useful too. Okay. Any final questions? And if there are more, again, we have the Slack channel and you're welcome to come on and ask us there. And we can connect you with more people in the SPA. It's about 250 or so grad students and postdocs, and it's a good community. Once you're a grad student, you should all definitely join. Okay, final question we'll answer from Moses. About the personal statement, is it better to highlight your skills or basically show what you have used your skills for? I think that sort of more narrative way of talking about what you learned to do and what you learned from what you did and how that sort of changed you and affected your research journey or your research interests is how you want to work it in, instead of just like listing off skills that you have. So they should sort of emergently see those skills coming out as you talk about what you specifically did in your research. Anybody else want to add anything, or are we good?
Yeah, one thing I want to add about the personal statement is just like take a look at what each university say about a personal statement. Like that could be a different term, like personal statement, personal history statement, and that might be something that could be that could appear in both the personal statement and the statement of purpose. But there's something that you don't have to reiterate what you are saying. And I feel like the personal statement seems to be something that's more personal. Like, I think what I wrote about the personal statement is something about like why do I want to do research and what research in general has taught me to go for the future career or something like that. And I didn't talk a lot about like what did I do for specifically how do I solve this problem, something like that. It's more of the personal things.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's that thing we say, don't get lost in the research details, just enough so that they know what you were working on and what you sort of learned from it. Okay. So we'll end it there. And again, we're happy to answer more questions on Slack if y'all get on there and join it. So thanks again to the panelists that we have here. Thank you to each of you for joining and helping out with both the panel part and also the workshop. We have recorded this and we will post it on our YouTube channel sometime soon. And so you're welcome to share it to your friends and colleagues at that point. I'll note that we have some office hours in a couple weeks, Saturday, December 2nd. So if you want some feedback on your application, there will be some SPA members there that will give you one-on-one feedback. It'll be quick, but it's a nice way to get some fresh eyes on your statements. And we can look at other documents as well. So this whole event, just as part of my generic outro here, has been a production of the Engineering Biology Research Consortium Student and Postdoc Association. For more information about EBRC, visit our website at ebrc.org. A big thank you to the rest of the SPA outreach team, where we have a lot going on. And finally, I'll say thanks to EBRC for their support for these outreach programs that we're working on. And we look forward to our next event soon. So bye, everyone, and thanks for coming.